it's difficult to communicate about your actual identity, especially if you're a big brand or a big company, because big companies often want to make money. So a big company has an option. They can either disguise these aspects of their identity and tell the world that they are something else. And that is a very nice illusion, which is actually very effective sometimes, unless, of course, you are caught. Then it is the opposite of effective.
Hi, I'm Nishant Garg with WhatMarketWants. My guest for today specializes in communication science. He has been teaching at the University of Amsterdam for more than 10 years. He received his Ph.D. in communication and media history in 2009. He has taken up multiple roles throughout his career as a market researcher, innovation advisor, PR consultant, and of course, a communication specialist. Let's welcome Dr. Rutger de Graaf. Hi.
Hi, Nishant. Thank you.
So how bad did I butcher your name?
No, it was you did really well. It's a typical Dutch name. So the proper pronunciation in Dutch would be Rutger de Graaf. But I appreciate the effort.
Okay. Could you walk us through how has your journey been in the communication field?
Sure. Obviously, communication is such a huge and impressive field. I think it's almost impossible for someone to be a specialist in all parts of our beautiful industry. My own path started when I studied communication in the 1990s, and I started my first job as a market researcher. Very quickly, I found that all the methods and theories that we use in science are very applicable to the daily practice of communication. And a market researcher is kind of a bridge function, I guess, between science and the marketeers, public relation officers, and lobbyists. So I started working with journalists and lobbyists and marketeers. And after a while, you start to appreciate each other's job more and more. So I made the leap to become a communication consultant myself. And I specialize in the application of scientific theories and models in a day-to-day setting of our field.
So what does the communication consultant exactly do? What kind of clients do you work with?
Yeah, I specialize in healthcare. So I work for hospitals, patient organizations, pharmaceutical companies, nursing homes, and the Ministry of Health. So those kinds of organizations. And I work a lot with green organizations that have to do with forestry, making urban gardens, urban forests, working together with healthcare professionals, with animals, those kinds of things. So it's kind of become my specialization to focus on the effects of nature on health. And then, of course, all the communication issues around that theme.
So before we take a deep dive, could you explain what is communication in simple words, according to you?
Yeah, that's of course never simple. Everyone has a different interpretation. For me, the act of transmitting information and receiving information, processing information, is communication. It can be every act, your eye contact, the hand gestures, having a Zoom conversation, non-verbal communication. It all communicates something. It's transmitting information. And of course, that information is received by someone who can take a completely different meaning from it. And that's also communication, how we process information. So it's not only about the sending, it's also about the receiving of information.
So it basically goes beyond words, and it's also dependent on how you act as a person while you're communicating. That's what you're saying.
Yes, for sure. There have been many scholars that say that our words are actually perhaps the least effective form of communication that we have. Touching someone, making eye contact, smelling someone. Those are very powerful means of communication as well.
Tell me, why should a brand care about how they communicate? Isn't it all about the product, the pricing, and all that stuff?
Well, that's of course a very important part of having a business, I guess. Um, I think if we leave the brands for a moment and just in general look at human beings, we are group animals. And because we are group animals, we need communication in our daily lives. If we were solitary animals, then communication might have been a less important thing in our existence, but it's not because we exist in groups. Much of our behavior comes from group mentality and group dynamics, even though we love to see ourselves as islands of independence. The social scientists, psychologists have often established the power of group dynamics. And I think companies, of course, I'm now oversimplifying because companies are, of course, very different. But many companies use these dynamics to market their products, to inform their publics, but they also have people working in their company. They have stakeholders. So every activity in our human existence is filled with communication. So therefore, it's important to um, be to do something with this topic and to think about it and make sure that the communication that we show is in line with our identity or who we are, or at least authentic.
So, what are the different forms in which a company usually communicates? How does it go beyond advertising?
Yeah, that's a good question, Nishant. Of course, we think about advertising when we talk about communication and a company, but there's also public relations and maintaining a good reputation among stakeholders. Um, some companies lobby; they try to get things legislated or influence legislation or something like that. And then there's all that communication that we do that is not really part of the responsibilities of a traditional communication department. And we have employees that we communicate with, we have friends of the company, we have fans of our product, we have people that criticize us or that have questions about our product or our services. So there are so many instances where communication is an issue. I think if we turn it around, it would be hard for me to come up with an activity of a company that does not require communication.
Usually, when people think about a brand's communication strategy, they think about advertising. But as you explained, it goes way beyond that. It includes things like after sales support, the way the management talks to their employees. All of this has to be integrated. It needs to be aligned to your brand's core identity.
Definitely. And a brand is also such a complicated concept because sometimes people with knowledge of communication, they come up with a beautiful brand plan. Um, but a brand is also what you communicate without really thinking about it too much. And the thing you subconsciously communicate could be very different from the plan that you made, which creates all kinds of confusion. Sometimes a company says, "Oh, we are informal and fun, and we are flexible," but when you talk to their help desk, they're not fun at all, and they're not flexible, and they're not helping you.
Probably that's because they're trying to carry a persona that they don't really believe in. So tell me, how often do you come across companies that lose out on business due to clumsy communication?
I think that happens all the time, and not only with companies, but it also happens with us as human beings. How many times don't we lose out on human contact because we communicate? Well, wouldn't say clumsily, but perhaps not in line with who we are, and that's also because we are complicated. We're not always the same. You're still the same person today as you were yesterday, but you're also slightly different. Your mood can be different during the day. Sometimes you're funny, sometimes you're serious, sometimes you can laugh about a joke that other times you find not a funny joke. And companies are, of course, the same. They're very complicated. They have different employees, they have different products and services. Sometimes they are based in different locations. So there's so many different factors. So it's almost a miracle if a company can maintain a cohesive communication strategy with so many people being involved.
So could you give us any examples of companies that don't do it well?
Well, um, There are of course many examples in our recent past, but let's go a bit back. That's perhaps easier. If you look at big organizations like newspapers, there was a time when newspaper journalists were kind of redesigning their field. And that was a time of Pulitzer and Hearst, famous newspaper barons. And we still have the Pulitzer Prize today, which has become famous as a prize for prestigious journalism. But in that time, at the one hand, these new journalists and these press barons, they claimed to bring the news and to help the news become a democratic force in society. At the same time, they were spreading gossip and they were spreading rumors and they were trying every trick to sell newspapers. So it happens all the time that we show behavior, communicative or otherwise, that is not in line with who we say we are, who we think we are. And in recent years, there have been car brands that say they're responsible and clean, while in fact they were falsifying information. So they were not acting responsibly, and they were not being clean and not honest at all. So those kinds of things we see quite a lot. There are companies that say, well, we are sustainable because we have changed one little thing in our production process, while in reality they could have changed 100 things to be sustainable. Um, and the other way around as well, sometimes we forget what is cool about us. So I think a lot of brands, they try to create this image of themselves, which is not in line with who they really are, while in fact they're overlooking very cool elements of their true identity.
So, in your opinion, which brand does it right? Does it really well?
Um, yeah, it's always difficult to mention brands because many people have different opinions on it. Um, well, for instance, a brand that I'm often surprised by is Apple. It's often mentioned as an example of excellent storytelling and excellent communication. Apple, the Apple company. Um, but also at the same time, we see that Apple claims that they are sustainable and they work with people in every country and they're responsible and they try to create this image of themselves as this arty and and cool but also responsible brand. And at the same time, their products are made in very unsafe factories where factory workers are not treated well, and people that try to speak out are punished for it and fired or otherwise punished. People that are hurt in those factories are not helped. So that's, I think, a very clear example where the decision making process is not in line with the communicated identity.
It is still such a successful brand. Do you think this has impacted their sales in any way?
That's always difficult to say. I mean, at the same time, they're also doing a fantastic job in creating this illusion, um, and I think that illusion is very tempting. Um, so perhaps the illusion is more effective in terms of sales, but you kind of hope that people that work in a company that have this schizophrenia, that they feel the unease. I mean, it must feel more comfortable to communicate in line with your identity. And I guess as a human being, it must feel very strange to communicate one thing and then act very differently. But it also, if we leave the companies alone for a moment, when you try to date someone and you create this completely fake picture of yourself, well, if I would say, well, I'm Rutger and I'm super athletic and I like to play all kinds of Olympic sports at a high level, that's just not true. So it will become very stressful for me to maintain that illusion.
Yeah.
Um,
So, in your view, which brand is actually sincere with their communication?
yeah, come up with international examples, of course. Well, I think, for instance, Facebook is a good example. And I'm looking for examples that are perhaps a bit provocative. Facebook has been attacked for their how they handle misinformation and also data of their clients. Um, I think if we zoom in on the communication of Facebook, actually shows that they have constantly, consequently said the same thing over and over again. So they haven't really um, exhibited this split personality, and their communication has always been in line with their actions. And what I thought was a very strong interview with Mark Zuckerberg, and he was actually attacked a lot for it by many of my colleagues. So yeah, opinions were wildly different on this, but it had to do with freedom of speech. And Mark Zuckerberg's argument was Facebook is a platform, and if people use this platform, um, it will be a slippery slope if we, as Facebook, are going to censor certain messages. Especially if we're going to decide which messages are dangerous or true or whatever. And his argument was, Mark Zuckerberg, who has a Jewish background, he said, if people deny the Holocaust, the Second World War Holocaust, um, then yeah, I'm not going to kick them off Facebook. Even though, obviously his opinion will be that that is not a, yeah, that he will not agree with those people. And I thought that was a very strong interview, but he was severely attacked for it. But I thought it was completely in line with what he communicated all of those years. So I thought that was a very consistent communication strategy.
Could you please elaborate on that? Because Facebook is such a controversial company. They often face heat due to their privacy and data protection issues. So, what do you exactly mean by Facebook is in line with their communication strategy? Could you explain?
Yeah. You know, as a communication professional, it's not my job to say who's right or who's wrong. So, I face the board of Facebook has certain opinions on privacy. That's their opinion. What I can judge is how consistent they are. If their opinions that they have, communicated about all of those years, if they are in line with their actual behavior. And with Facebook, you see that actually it is in line. So all of those years, they said, well, Facebook is a company that gives a certain product, and the product is information of users. That's their business model. So yeah, if they sell this information, that is completely in line with what they said all along and what they promised. That people don't agree with it is, of course, another issue. But yeah, I think it's an interesting dilemma. So yeah, I think they actually have communicated very much in line with their communicated identity.
It's very interesting. So, tell me, why do you think the popular opinion is against it?
Well, if I think in terms of um, it's difficult to communicate about your actual identity, especially if you're a big brand or a big company, because big companies often want to make money. So they have certain elements of their identity that are perhaps something that we'd rather not see. So a big company has an option. They can either disguise these aspects of their identity and tell the world that they are something else. And that is a very nice illusion, which is actually very effective sometimes, unless, of course, you are caught. Then it is the opposite of effective. Um, it's easier and perhaps from a communication perspective, more morally sound to communicate in line with your identity. So if you are a company that wants to make money, then yeah, perhaps that should be honestly communicated instead of making some whole story about something else, while in fact it's just all not true. Um, and what's wrong with having a company that wants to make money? I mean, I think there are a lot of companies in the world that want to make money. So is that such a huge drama? But somehow with big companies, we expect something else. We expect them to do this whole song and dance where they say, no, we are actually not in it to make money. That's just a side effect. Yes, I might be one of the richest people in the world, but I'm actually here to, and then this whole weird story develops, which very clearly has nothing to do with reality. But yeah, I think we like to believe in fairy tales sometimes.
You clearly love Apple, so I have to ask you on a lighter note, which phone brand do you use?
Yeah, I'm using a MacBook now.
Okay.
So my phone brand is again something else, but I use a lot of Apple products because I like the product. But yeah, in terms of communication, I think we sometimes expect a bit too much from certain brands, and we as consumers we punish we punish good behavior, and we kind of expect companies to lie to us, and we also um, give them our a benefit for that, and I think that's not a good thing. I mean, in the end, our world will benefit from more open and transparent communication instead of lying and deceit.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting. So tell me, what are the three key elements of communication science?
Well, there are, in general, three goals that we usually distinguish, and this is, of course, a huge oversimplification of our field. But we say communication is about informing. It's about creating an emotion, and it's about processing information. Those are three very different elements of our field. Some scholars have said that it's even different parts of how we listen to a message or read a message. Um, we feel things, we think things, and we send out information and emotions. And those are different parts of our field. And of course, they are intertwined. They work in collaboration with each other. One directional communication is sometimes taking place, but ideally it will become something of the past, especially with new media. It becomes easier to have two directional communication where we and where big brands also listen. And listening and processing information is, of course, the most important part of human communication.
So
During your day, in your existence, you spend more time listening and observing the world around you and processing the input than you are sending out stuff.
tell us about your course on communication science. Is this something that may benefit entrepreneurs and marketers?
Yeah, I hope many people will benefit from it. It is a introduction to communication science. It is meant for people without a specific background in our field. It has a steep learning curve, but of course, people can also stop halfway. Um, I think it gives a nice introduction to the basic, most dominant models and theories and concepts from our field. Many of them are immediately applicable to a communication setting, especially in a commercial enterprise, but also I think to our personal lives, because we also use communication, of course, in our private lives. And yeah, I think it will help bridge the gap a bit between the working principles of communication that have been studied for more than 2,000 years by scientists. So that's quite a time. It's a very old science. Already Aristotle and Cicero, Roman and Greek philosophers, were studying this field of communication, and they already came with models and theories about the topic. Um, and to bridge that gap between science on one hand, these working principles that are well established, and the daily practice on the other.
So, why is it even considered as a science, not an art or a skill?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, you know, I'm perfectly okay with considering it an art. It is one of the social sciences in the sense that theories have been tested and retested and yeah, I think that is something that social sciences do all the time. We build upon newer theories and we come up with new um, studies to perfect our knowledge. But at the same time, it's human behavior. So we also know that theories that have been well established for many years can all of a sudden um, change because a new study shows new insights. So in that sense, I guess it's both an art and a science, if that's possible.
Lastly, what are your favorite business, branding, and marketing books? Do you have any recommendations for us?
Yes, I think there's one book that is my absolute favorite, or one author, I should say, is Cialdini. It's a very interesting book that bridges the gap between
Influence.
science, yeah, influence, and daily practice. Um, he wrote different books pretty much about the same studies, but the newer ones are more elaborate. And what I like is that it's a scientist who followed courses in house with car sales companies and advertising agencies and all kinds of businesses that sell things and try to communicate professionally and use these working principles in a day-to-day setting. And then he links it to science, which is, I think, a fantastic inspiring book. It was very inspiring to me, at least. Yeah, so I can recommend it to everyone. And if I can give one other suggestion, I would recommend the book De Oratore of Cicero. It is a Latin book, but it has been translated in almost every language. You can also find it for free online. The Perfect Orator. And Cicero was a Roman statesman, very important historical figure in the Roman Empire. And he was well known as a social scientist. He wrote books about it, and he was well established as a politician and very influential in that field. And he used those working principles on a day-to-day basis. And I think that really shows the power of our field, and also the power of connecting science and professionally communicating on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, it has been great talking to you. Thanks a lot for your time and insights.
Yeah, you're welcome. Likewise, Nishant. Thank you so much, and good luck with your podcast.
If you all want to learn more, check out his course, Introduction to Communication Science. You'll find the link in the description. To get more such great insights from the world of business, branding, and marketing, subscribe, follow What Market Wants on social media, and let me help you unlock your market potential. Take care.